The dark night of the soul is a term that transcends time and place, speaking to the very heart of the human experience. Carl Jung and St. John of the Cross, though centuries apart, both explored this profound spiritual crisis, where one feels utterly lost and abandoned, yet poised for transformation. It is in the depths of this darkness that the seeds of spiritual awakening and ego dissolution are sown. St. John of the Cross, a 16th-century Spanish mystic, coined the term dark night of the soul to describe the soul's journey through a period of intense suffering and spiritual desolation. This darkness, though excruciating, is necessary for the soul to be purged of attachments and illusions. St. John wrote, "The soul is made divine by union with God, but this union cannot be achieved without first stripping away the false self, the ego. The ego, driven by desires, fears, and attachments, is the very thing that separates us from God. In the dark night, the soul is purified, much like gold in a fire." Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, had his own interpretation of this spiritual crisis. He believed that the dark night is not just a religious experience, but a psychological one as well. Jung viewed it as a confrontation with the shadow, the repressed, unconscious parts of ourselves that we fear or deny. In this confrontation, we are forced to face our deepest fears, anxieties, and weaknesses. This, Jung believed, is essential for individuation, the process of becoming whole. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, Jung famously said, but by making the darkness conscious. Modern life is filled with distractions that prevent us from engaging with this dark night. In an age of social media, endless entertainment, and constant busyness, many of us flee from our inner darkness, preferring to project a curated version of ourselves to the world. But this only delays the inevitable. Eventually, the soul will call us into the dark night, demanding that we face our pain and illusions. It may come in the form of depression, a failed relationship, or a loss of meaning in life, and while it feels like a descent into despair, it is actually the soul's call for transformation. Take, for instance, the story of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Here we see his encounter with the dark night of the soul. In his anguish, knowing he is to face crucifixion, Jesus prays, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," Matthew 26 verse 38. He pleads with God, "If it is possible, let this cup pass from me," but ultimately submits, "Yet not as I will, but as you will." This moment reflects the deepest surrender of the ego. Jesus, in his humanity, feels abandoned, yet he relinquishes his will to the divine. This is the dark night in its purest form, the soul stripped bare, willing to let go of everything, even the self. Jung often spoke of this surrender as a death of the ego. The ego, which clings to control, identity, and separation, must dissolve for true spiritual awakening to occur. This is not an easy process. In fact, it often feels like a kind of death. To die to self, as both Christian mysticism and modern psychology suggest, is to let go of our false sense of identity, the labels, roles, and expectations we have accumulated, and to trust in something greater. In the modern world, this can manifest as a career collapse, a loss of purpose, or even an existential crisis. For example, someone who has built their entire identity around their job might face a dark night when they are laid off. Stripped of the title, the prestige, the paycheck, they are forced to ask, "Who am I without this?" It is here, in this ego death, that the opportunity for true spiritual awakening presents itself. In the words of Rumi, the wound is the place where the light enters you. The dark night may feel like a deep wound, but it is a necessary one. It is the breaking open of the old self to make space for the new. And while it feels like abandonment, as though God or the universe has forsaken us, it is, in fact, a call to deeper union. St. John described it as the soul's journey to divine union, where one moves from darkness into an indescribable light. Ego dissolution and spiritual awakening go hand in hand. When the ego dissolves, the barriers between self and others, between self and God, begin to fade. This is why so many spiritual traditions speak of oneness as the ultimate truth. In Buddhism, this is the realization of anatta, or no self, where the ego is seen as an illusion. In Sufism, the mystics speak of fana, the annihilation of the self, where the individual ego dissolves into the divine. The dark night of the soul is the threshold to this awakening. It is a painful, disorienting process, but it is also the most profound transformation we can experience. As the psalmist writes, "Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Psalm 23 verse 4. In the darkness, we are not abandoned, but guided towards something far greater than the self. Jung's insights remind us that to emerge from this night is to encounter a more complete, authentic self, one that is not shackled by ego but is instead aligned with the deeper truths of existence. As difficult as the dark night may seem, it is a gift. It is an invitation to shed what no longer serves us and to awaken to a deeper, more expansive reality. And while the journey is solitary, we are never truly alone. Jesus' own dark night assures us that even in our deepest despair, there is hope for resurrection. The darkness is not the end, it is the beginning. Thanks for listening. M. Nate.